I read in a ship's manual how they were trying to come up through the grates, screaming and howling because they were frothing at the mouth and they were dying. But what happened was, they would die, and when they would die, they would open the grates to let them out, to let some of them out, to relieve some of the pressure, but nothing could be done. Then they would, when all this was over, they would go down and close and open the ports again. But meanwhile, a lot of these people had already died and had been dead for 2 or 3 days, if not more. So you being chained to a particular slave would happen so that this slave's arm would be coming off, because after a while the body begins to not mortify but come apart, because it's already set up to where it has to die. Once the heart stops, then the skin worms come alive. They begin to consume the body. The body begins to fall apart to its masses. So in the event I'm chained to this particular person, when they bring the slaves out, they pull body parts out. They were opening their ships and pulling body parts out. And remember one thing, that you couldn't go to the bathroom. There was no such thing. The sanitary conditions were deplorable, like I said in the beginning. What would happen, you could be sitting at any time in an inch to 1.5 inches to 3 inches of your own feces. And the feces there with you. You had the blood, the vomit, the urine, the dysentery. You had everything there. You had the bodies that were decomposing. Everything was there. And again, like I said, the British men of war said they could smell the ship for 5 miles because of the smell and the stench. Once they got these ships close to land, they began to throw overboard dead bodies, which brought sharks in close to the city. Now, and close to land. Now, there was one ship in South Carolina that dumped her dead overboard close to land. The bodies washed up on land. The people in the village or in the town complained about the stench of the dead bodies. There were men, women, and children's bodies, about 60 or 70 of them, on the beach that had washed up. On board ship, I read in the ship's journal, written by one of the surgeons on the ships, who said that these poor wretches aboard this ship had no idea what awaits them in America in that kind of slavery. They will be clamoring to get back on this ship. As horrible as all this was, nothing compares to what awaits them in the Americas.
For those who survived the Middle Passage, they still had more horrors to face them. They now had to go on the auction block to be sold. Many families, it's hard to imagine that an entire family was able to survive intact with a mother, father, and children. However, families were still formed. Mothers who may have lost their children aboard ship were able to take the orphan children of maybe their sister mate. Fathers who had lost entire families became the father of new families. So no one was left alone. These children and parents bonded during that voyage. Following the voyage, they were given just a little time maybe to rest, because they had to be prepared for the auction block. They were cleaned up. Palm oil was put all over their bodies to make them look healthy. Their hair was shaved so that they would get rid of any, mites or anything that they may have. Then they would be put on the auction block. Every orifice of their body was checked. Their mouths were held open as they looked inside their mouths for, decay in their teeth. They would look in their ears. They were made to bend over. How humiliated that must have been for those slaves, particularly the women, because they were naked as they stood before these leering crowds of people. A child who was suckling at a mother's breast would be taken and just thrown into the crowd, given as a token because it was more of a nuisance to keep that child there. While this mother, who so dearly wanted to keep her children with her, had no choice. They were taken from her as she was sold away. A young wench, a girl maybe 14, 15 years old, would be considered quite valuable because of the number of children she could have over the years. And a young buck, a male about that same age, would also be considered highly valuable because of the many years of labor he had ahead of him. Somebody in this age group could go for maybe $500. Someone older, maybe a woman in her 50s or 40s, who was long past her childbearing age, would be sold perhaps as a cook to work in the home. She might go for maybe $3.50. A man that age could be a butler. Or they both could be sold as field hands, and they may go for maybe $200 or maybe less. Young children, depending on their age, could go for maybe $50, $75, $100 because they too had some years ahead of them. They just had to be trained. But you need to remember that these were human beings that had bounties put on them. They were sold away from their mother country. They're now sold away from families that they had bonded with. So there was no sanctuary for these people. And they were people, but they were not treated as people.
This is the way the slave shackles would work. The chain was unlocked. Once the chain was unlocked, taken apart, very ingenious, very elementary. The hand was put in. Once the hand was put in, locking device would commence. It's just like a puzzle, but very elementary. It's locked in like this. That's one side. This is the locking device. This locking device is the other handcuff. It goes on like this, fits in like this. There's a pin that goes in. This pin slides in like this. Once it's slid in, it's locked. You're then locked in. The whole concept of this is to fix it so the person could not get away. You notice how these are made. If you look at the side here, this is all handmade. And that will show you why there were so many keys that were made to so many different things. If you ever notice, a jailer had 50,000 keys on his side. These keys represented all these locks because they could not find the same key was not always put in the same lock. And by being hand forged and handmade, they're always different. So that was your differences then. These are middle passage shackles. These shackles were used in the middle passage. What would happen is, once they got going up the gangplank, what they would do would take these off. These went off. This bar would go across the front of the leg, around the front. This bar would be put in the back. It would look just like this, with the legs here. After the shackles were put on, remember one thing, because of this metal here, because of the sharpness of the metal, it would actually cut into the skin. And when it would cut into the skin, a lot of times when they would get to land or go down to inspect the slaves, under here you would see maggots. Maggots would be cleaning the wound. But it showed that infection was already there, the maggots were cleaning it, and the bone was actually protruding through on some slaves. When they would get to land, they would try to cover it over with different muds, different creams, different things to cover it over, yet they were already scarred. In order to keep from scarring them, what they did after that, they went to a rolled kind of shackle, which would bruise but wouldn't so much break the skin. They had a rolled shackle. That way they had chains, they could move freer. They could take the slaves out much freer and much faster. Here, in another segment, we have runaway shackles. These were used and put